All right. Well, welcome with Speak Up with Anthony Scaramucci. Welcome to Speak Up with Anthony Scaramucci. I have an amazing guest and a dear friend today. But I just want to remind everybody you can call into this show. It's 928 The Mooch. So it's 928 436 6624. And I want to welcome Hitha Herzog. I think the first time I met Hitha was on a Fox Business panel. I think we were on Maria Bartiromo's show together. It's probably
Yes, that's
five,
right.
6 years ago, right after I got fired from the White House, I think, if I remember correctly. And you are an author. You wrote Black Market Billions about retail theft in our society. You've worked for U.S. News. You worked for Forbes. And you now have a fantastic company called H Squared Research, where you're dedicated to all things retail. So welcome to the show. What did I miss, Hitha?
Oh man, you nailed it. And I think we actually met prior to you being at the White House. I think
Oh,
we
we
actually
did.
met
Okay.
on Charles Payne's show in 2015. I think
2015.
you
I
were
can
just
see
on
that.
Charles Payne's show when we were doing Making Money, and we all became good friends from that experience.
Well, he's a great guy, by the way. I haven't seen him in a
Yes,
while. So him
yes.
and Neil Cavuto are two great guys, but you are also a very special person. So give us an update. What are you working on? Tell us about H Squared Research.
Well, my research company really focuses in on retail research, but it's white label research for registered investment advisors. So a lot of investment advisors may have, assets under management of under 500 million, and shockingly they don't have marketing departments to get that research out. So they call me to do white label and bespoke research for them. And in addition to that, I'm a senior fellow at a think tank called Data Catalyst Institute out of Washington. And we do a lot of research on small business, both urban small businesses and rural small businesses. And we just came out with a study. Actually, we came out with about a year ago called Super Sellers. And that's where that, in addition to my company and then being on air and then being a mom of twins, it's just a lot. Someone wanted me to write the sequel to Black Market Billions. And I said, with what time? Please find me some time to go ahead and write a book. I don't have a ghostwriter. It's me. Like, are there more hours in the day that I'm going to go ahead and write a book? I don't know.
Well, I mean, this is the reason why I wanted to have you on, because you're doing a lot of different things. And so you have this sort of bandwidth of experience. Let's start with small businesses in America.
Mhm.
So I'm a Wall Streeter. So Wall Streeters invariably get everything wrong. We say the market's going higher when it's about to crash. We say the market is going through the floor when then it booms. I thought the economy was going to be way slower than it currently is. Got it wrong. I thought the Fed was going to end the rate cycle raises last, quarter. Got it wrong. So tell me what's going on in small businesses, and tell me why the economy is so resilient.
I think there's a couple things that are going on, Anthony. And I think one thing that we're not really talking about enough is how much money people are putting on their credit cards. And I know this is very simple, but if you do a comparable of the earnings to major banks like Wells Fargo and Citi and JP Morgan Chase, if you look back at what the CFOs were saying on the earnings calls, they were saying that a lot of the consumer, the balances that people are holding on their credit cards is increasing. And it's really kind of a big portion of what was driving their revenues for those quarterly earnings. So if you think about that and you think about, well, no one had anticipated the economy to be, moving at the pace that it was moving at, were we really just looking at what people were putting on the credit cards as well? Because access to credit is not like what it was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. Credit markets are really easier. I don't want to say easy, but it's easier to access or increase your credit lines of credit. And I think there's a lot of FOMO spending that's going on. With that said,
is this a sugar high then? I mean, so, and social media drives a lot of sugar high. So we end up with lots of credit card debt over the next 24 months, and then people panicked in terms of being able to pay for that? Or do you think that their wages will keep track and they'll be able to manage the credit card debt?
Well, we saw the labor numbers come in, right? And it was saying that actually wages are increasing. So if that trajectory continues, then maybe, I want to be hopeful and I want to say come January, February, when everyone gets their credit card statements, people are going to be able to hopefully feel better to pay those balances off in full. What ends up getting really suspect is when the Federal Reserve, the Fed increases the interest rate, or the rate goes up, right? That has an impact on the consumer and credit card rates. And then people aren't able to pay back those balances in full, and people are carrying those balances. So I saw a statistic that basically said that people are still paying off their balances from last Christmas. That's not good. That's
Right.
really, really not good. And I think if that continues, if that's a trend that continues, and again, I want to be hopeful. I try to be poly positive on all these things. I want to say, oh yes, people are going to feel better. They're going to be able to pay off their credit cards in full. Job market is looking better. Labor market's looking better, especially in healthcare. That's beefing up. That people are going to just pay those off. But I think the realist in me thinks that's actually not going to happen, and you're going to see those balances carried over.
Well, I mean, it's a vicious cycle for somebody who's a consumer because, you may need something. We also know that the savings rate isn't where we want it to be. And so sometimes people, frankly, put credit card debt on for emergencies or necessities. And they get caught behind the eight ball because the rates are ridiculously high. And they start out with minimum payments or slightly more than minimum payments. And before you know, they're sitting there with bone crushing debt. So, you are poly positive. I love that word, probably. I'm likely to steal that from you at some point.
Take it, please.
But when you say you're poly positive, what would you be worried about? Not to be poly negative, but what would you be worried about for the consumer, for the economy, for the stock market?
Yeah. So negative Nelly's going to come out now. So what I'm nervous about is that fact that people, to your point, in the past, people would just use their credit cards to emergency spend, right? Oh my gosh, I broke my leg. I don't have insurance. I got to put up my credit card, or someone lost a tooth, or God forbid, someone got into an accident, right? What people are doing now, Anthony, is FOMO spending, right? Fear of missing out. So what we're seeing from the consumer side, and then we're going to talk about small business in a second, because that's actually a very interesting poly positive story, right? The consumer is not necessarily spending on clothing and items, but they're spending on experiences. And of course, they're going to do this. All of my Instagram feed are people in, Santorini all summer long in Greece. Meanwhile, I'm sitting here with the kids, like worrying about how I'm going to pay for summer camp in New York City. Like, oh my gosh, it's so expensive here, right? So of course you are feeling that FOMO, and people, access to credit, they put it on their credit cards. Holidays are coming up. People are still kind of feeling the ripple effect of not being able to spend so much during the pandemic, or being fearful of spending. So they're just FOMO spending on those cards. It's all about mass consumption. That's all we heard during Black Friday. Spend more on the e-commerce sites. Ads are coming at you. So that's what makes me nervous, is that FOMO spend. Do people really understand that they're not probably going to they're not going to be able to pay that back unless their wages increase to a specific point and their savings rate gets higher? And those two things aren't happening at the pace that I would like it to go at, for those balances to be paid off in full. And people.
So what's actionable? What's actionable for investors then, Hitha?
Well, a couple things. I think investors should definitely start looking at those bank stocks. I think we've always said that, right? I think, banks are certainly making their, it was shocking to me, because usually when I do my retail analysis, you look at what people are spending on credit cards, and, but I don't really dig so much into the earnings of the banks. And when I started to do that, I really saw the symbiotic relationship of what the banks were earning, and then what, obviously how the consumer was doing, and then how that was going to impact the retail stocks. So when you have to look at those in tandem with each other. And if I think if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to misspeak here, but I think the forecast is that we're going to continue to see that revenue spike on those credit card balances for those three stocks that I had mentioned, Wells Fargo, Citi, and JP Morgan into the next quarter. So from an investment standpoint, I would certainly have that in the back of my mind, especially if you are looking at the retail side. Now, from the retail perspective, I mean, there's one gangbuster stock that continues to go nuts, and that's Shopify. I mean, Anthony, did you see what Harley did during Black Friday at the Sphere in Las Vegas? And I don't know if you follow him on Twitter or if you saw pictures of this.
I didn't see it, but obviously I'm well versed in the Sphere. You know, my kids are dying for me to take out an ad on the Sphere.
Yeah.
When I looked at the pricing, I almost fell over. You know,
okay, I have a hookup for you. We're going to talk
450,000.
offline about this. No, I'm hooking you up. We're going to talk offline about this regarding the Sphere. But just to give everyone an explanation of what Harley, this is the CEO of Shopify, what he did. He took the Sphere and then in real time had Black Friday sales around the world. Literally, the Sphere was the world. And if you looked at the Sphere, it was like the Santa tracker, like NORAD Santa tracker. All weekend long during Black Friday, you were able to see the numbers of Black Friday from Shopify vendors, how much they were making all weekend long. It was the best marketing. It was so bananas, and it was so telling of how much FOMO spend was going on and how much money Shopify was making, just being the platform for these D2C and e-commerce brands. So I think it's less about, yes, retail is for the most part healthy. I mean, yes, you have these outliers like some of the department stores and the debt that they are carrying and how that's going to get slammed if the Fed increases interest rates. But I think we have to dig a little bit deeper. And, Charles Payne was the one that taught me this, is to look at things like Shopify, for example, and, companies that are kind of basically creating the ripple effect in retail.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I see these companies the way I see the news media and the way I see you and me in Speak Up with Anthony Scaramucci, because you've got the traditional media out there. They're only going to tell you a certain thing, and they're only going to dig at a certain depth, and they certainly don't have interaction like we like to have with the people that are viewing us. And so Shopify is sort of like that in my mind. It's sort of this, I don't want to say underground, but it's sort of like a different element to traditional shopping, even different from Amazon. 17 days to go. Okay, the panic light is on in the Scaramucci house. Okay, because let's face it, we are Santa's helpers, and right now we're not making enough toys here in our little toy factory, so we are panicked. Tell me about the consumer and the vibe of the consumer heading into Christmas. 17 days to go.
Well, we kind of talked about it. It's that FOMO effect, right? And right. I think that the consumer maybe has a false sense.
Well, you can be FOMO and anxious, or you can be FOMO and pumped. You know what I mean? If you're having a great year, people have a tendency to flourish.
Exactly.
Where do you think we are?
I think for the most part, I think there's FOMO and pumped, but maybe pumped for the wrong reasons. I think they're pumped because they have access to credit and it's making them feel richer than they really are. I don't think they're really thinking about what's going to come January and February when they open up those credit card statements. But with that said, I feel like we're going to see a real significant spike in spending as we get closer to Christmas. We're in the midst of Hanukkah right now. So I hear you on the panic. I bought all the Hanukkah presents for my girls last week. Thankfully, they're all bought.
Happy Hanukkah, by the way.
Thank you so much.
But you have a very smart banks, Citi, Wells Fargo, JP Morgan, all reporting what you're saying, that the consumers are carrying more debt. And they're smart banks and they have decent underwriting standards here. How much of a loss factor are they building in? Because they're washing the country with capital. They're extending lots of liquidity to people. But they know that a group of those people are just never going to be able to pay back what they're extending. So what do those numbers look like?
I mean, if you're looking at it based on what happened during the last recession, I think the banks really stumbled because of that exact fact. I would think that for this time around, they're probably baked it into the numbers that there is going to be defaults on those credit cards, into the second and third quarter. And I think that's why we were seeing the forecast come in as high as they did when they reported out earnings last quarter. With that said, I don't know to what degree people are going to be defaulting on those credit cards or, unable to pay back or carrying those balances. Again, I don't want to, be so negative, but my gut feeling is that it's going to be a lot larger than what the banks are anticipating. I truly don't think the consumer realizes how much is at stake, how much they are actually carrying. It's going to be, it's going to be an issue.
So you could see, second and third quarter loss reserves for the bank. I mean, this is something obviously that we have to look at more carefully.
Yeah, we're not even talking. I mean, Anthony, this is like if everything stays normal. I mean, who would have ever predicted in 2020 that a global pandemic would have just gripped the entire, planet Earth, and we would have all been at a standstill?
Not us. I mean, we not only didn't predict it. I'll completely embarrass myself. I walked out of a meeting with two World Economic, health organization officials, not World Economic, but WHO officials. It was late January of 2020. I told my team, this is completely overblown. This is going to be like SARS in 2003. So we got roasted in March of 2020 for not anticipating the depth of the pandemic. Having said that, I think that we could be on the right side of our guesstimates on inflation. I feel like the inflation numbers are going to come down faster than the street is anticipating. We'll have to see about that. But from an investor perspective, we've had Lululemon's earnings out. We've got Starbucks. I want to ask you why Starbucks can't seem to get it together. What do you think of McDonald's as an example? They have this new concept called Cosmic, which they are obviously going head on with Starbucks with that. Let's start with Lululemon. What's your opinion there?
I think Lululemon, the new CEO, while I think he looks, I don't know if you read the New York Times feature on him that came out a couple months ago. He is really like if you're going to put down on paper what a typical stellar alpha male CEO that goes running at 4 a.m, 17 miles before he starts his day, he is that guy. And I think that type of energy just isn't necessarily transferring to what Lululemon is trying to do.
Hitha, you're making me feel bad because I'm really not that guy. If you pass me the donut, pass me the cannolis and donuts, please.
I read that article and I was like, I'm so excited because I'm a runner. I'm like, I'm so excited that his wife is letting him go and run 17 miles before he starts his day. I wish my husband would let me do that, but that's just not going to happen. So I think the specifically there was a real focus on menswear in Lululemon, and really, they had that acquisition of Mirror. I think they really wanted to create a lifestyle around Lululemon, but the core of that business is women's yoga pants. Young teenagers, kids in middle school want those yoga pants. And I think they are failing to identify that is their core audience, and they aren't specifically marketing towards that. Everyone knows the men's yoga pants are great. I don't think he needs to just hit that over the head so hard, but I think they're losing who their core customer is, and they're not marketing sufficiently to that.
Okay. And just a quick couple thoughts on Starbucks and McDonald's.
Yeah. Anthony, when was the last time you were in a Starbucks?
I'm a Starbucks addict, so don't go by me. I what I do is I got the mobile app on my way into the city. I get myself an iced coffee.
Maybe you're the outlier because I never go into Starbucks. I think it's the worst customer experience ever. They still can't get my name right. The only time a Starbucks gets my name right is when I'm actually in India.
My God, the pastries are terrible. The eggs that they put in the microwave taste like plastic. I mean, the coffee's okay. If you travel to Europe, the coffee's absolutely terrible, but compared to other terrible coffee in America, the coffee is okay. But that was a hot store 20 years ago. It's no longer hot. It's not fresh.
It's not only, and I think also they lost kind of what you go to Starbucks for. I mean, I live on the Upper West Side. The Starbucks here, my husband and I were talking about it. It's really synonymous with holidays and gathering. I don't know why the Starbucks kills it every holiday season. We walk by there, no one's in there. It just, right. I think there was a lot of, between the labor issues, they brought in Howard Schultz to try to like quell what's going on there. But I think in this, like transition and trying to figure out what was going on there, again, they also lost what the core appeal of Starbucks is. Yes, they have fancy drinks and it's very cool, but on the marketing side, it's no longer, do you remember back in 2002, you would see Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen walk around with their Starbucks mugs, and it was, kind of US News, not US News and World Report, but Us Weekly fodder, right? The marketing aspect of Starbucks, it's no longer, no one really wants to go there anymore. And it's so easy just to get good coffee everywhere else. And honestly, from a market share standpoint, that is why, this cosmic that's coming out of McDonald's is recognizing that here is, white space in market share. They are realizing that this is the ability to kind of take that. I see we're getting some. Are we getting some questions or? Oh,
yeah, we're going to get some questions here in a second. We're going to switch over to what I call Mooch University.
I love this.
And our topic today is about debt. And so since we were talking about debt, I'm going to give my 2 cents on debt. And if you're cool with it, I'd love to have you chime in. But what I tell our viewers and listeners is that there's 2 types of debt to me. One is a good form of debt, and that is debt that's coupled with investment. As an example, if I'm going to buy a house and I'm taking on a 30-year mortgage, and I know that I have enough income to pay for that mortgage, and I can defease the principal of that mortgage down over time and build equity for myself, I would much rather see people do that than get into a rental habit where they're in a nice rental, but they're not building any equity for themselves. And so that's a good form of debt. A bad form of debt, unfortunately, is sort of the stuff that we're talking about, where you're taking on debt. You've got a 15 to 25% credit card rate, depending on where you live and depending on what the banks can get away with. And that is sort of that sugar high, sugar rush debt. And I think you know this about me. Most people do. I started with absolutely nothing. One of the big debts that I took on, which I would say was good debt, it's more controversial today, is student debt. And so I had to borrow money to go to undergrad. I borrowed money to go to law school. But again, that was good debt because it was capital investing debt. And so when we talk about debt in our society, I just want people to think, not to be scared. There's good debt, and then there's that sort of sugar high bad debt. What are your thoughts there, Hitha, before I switch over to taking on questions?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think also, the individual needs to assess and be honest with themselves, what the good debt looks like for them. And if they can actually take that on. And so it doesn't turn into bad debt. I think the problem, especially with student loans, is that young people maybe they don't have the maturity. I certainly didn't when I took on a student loan and realized that, 15 years later, I'm paying back my grad school loan for journalism. No offense to media. Love you all out there. But, if you want to pay off I had a $35,000 loan. It took me forever to pay that off. And it just, I think people need to be honest with themselves so that good debt doesn't turn into a monstrous debt that they are suddenly getting into this like hyper loop of like, I'm paying off interest now at this point.
I had a really cool graphic that we were going to run before we started this conversation. You guys want to run the graphic for me? Is that cool? I know it's a little bit of about the graphic is just like a magnet pulling into the Mooch, the Mooch U. Anyway, it's a little horrifying, but my children are getting Mooch U t-shirts and sweatshirts for Christmas. Okay, that's just, they don't know that, but I know that. And of course, I probably will force them to wear it, some type of indentured servitude. All right, let's go to questions. And it is wonderful to see you, by the way. And congratulations on your beautiful family.
Thank you so much. It's always fun seeing you too. This is awesome. I love this.
Okay, let's go to the why won't the low employment rate and aggressive Fed action keep the next recession relatively mild? Okay, this is from Houston from Arizona via email. Heather, you want to take a run at that first?
Why won't the low unemployment rate and
Aggressive
aggressive
Fed
Fed
action keep the
action,
next recession relatively mild?
why won't it?
Yeah, it
I
might,
would,
right?
I mean, I guess, I hate to keep going back to this, like credit and debt, but I think it comes down to debt. I think that is what, if the Fed continues to increase the interest rate, it won't, you have to have that sort of, I hate this term, but that perfect sort of storm. It's not even a storm, but this perfect sort of balance of wages getting higher
Mhm.
and people being able to pay off those balances
Yeah,
completely.
and eventually the Fed getting ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
I think that's the big issue. And so the thing I would say that could happen. I mean, and this is the thing about investing, and this gets everybody upset. And this is why every FA is a victim when bad things are going on, because people want to blame somebody.
Right.
But a lot of it is really situational. But there is a Venn diagram of things that can happen, Houston. And one of those things is the low unemployment number and perfect mama bear Fed action keeps our next recession very mild. And that would be a miracle. That'd be a home run. That's one quadrant. There's probably a 35% chance that can happen. But what typically does happen is the thing we have to be worried about is once a recession starts, it gets way worse way quickly. And I'll just give a very quick example. In July of 2007, Mr. Bernanke, Chairman Bernanke, Federal Reserve Chairman, said, hey, this subprime problem is about a $90 billion problem. It's a very small problem on a relative basis. And so if necessary, we'll ring fence and contain it. But they didn't move quickly enough. And it snowballed into a $6 trillion problem because once everybody freezes their consumption, it
Right.
sort of causes this trap door in the economy. But I certainly hope that Houston is right. And I've got that on the table as one of the potential outcomes. We have a caller, Janet, coming in from Texas. Janet, welcome to Speak Up.
Hello.
Hey, can you hear us, Janet? What's your question?
Yes. What I'm wondering is I'm online all the time. Well, I'm 71, but I love information, and I just wish we'd had the internet when I was as young as you people. But it it really makes a person wonder when you see the Fed says one thing, and of course we know our credit card debt is up, the national debt is up. If you want to polish your crystal ball here a minute, what do y'all want to go out on a limb and say when you think there's going to be something like a depression, or do you think there's going to be, or are we going to continue? I mean, the jobs, the people that I know. Well, of course, I'm in Austin. It's a giant software capital, and a lot of my younger friends, they tend to be software engineers and buying real estate with their money and stuff like that. And I have to tell you, they're raising chickens, they're gardening in their backyard. Um, they're going retro in a lot of ways, and really not buying Teslas, not going to Starbucks every day, and things like that. So I'm seeing a real dichotomy between what you see in the news, that some of the mainstream news wants to say, well, we have plenty of jobs. And then other people, look at a lot of YouTubers, are pointing out, yes, but if you have the people who have given up or haven't recently applied for unemployment aren't counted anymore. And a lot of people are underemployed. And a lot of people, if they have two jobs, apparently they count them twice. So it's kind of a Orwellian financial picture that we have right now. What do y'all think is the thing to believe? And of course, you have the gold bugs and all that, but who can afford gold,
I think,
that
I
is.
think the general question is about though that trap door falling out and whether or not there's a potentiality for a depression. So I'll start and I'll ask Ethan to jump in as well. I never want to rule out a catastrophe. Certainly, bad things can happen. You get a combination of a debt spiral and a war, or a combination of those things. But what typically has happened is there's a general resiliency in the American economy, and we usually get ourselves bailed out by great technology. Things happen that improve our productivity, they lower costs. We were buying flat screen TVs 15 or 20 years ago for $6,000 or $7,000. We're buying that TV, and it's a way better TV for $600. Hitha, what would you say to Janet?
I think, yeah.
Thank you for your common sense and your optimism. I think in this country, we went through 1918, we went through the 40s, and I was born in 52, and my mother at that time was 41. So she grew up on a farm in Minnesota, and men would come by. That's where that term tramp. They become tramping on the road, and they'd load them up with food and keep them going until they got to the next town to try and find work. And I think Americans are so resilient. When I look at my own ancestors and things I'm doing now, I'm a disabled veteran. I'm living on that. But if you cook at home, like instead of going to Starbucks, I get some Hershey's natural cocoa, and I mix it with cane sugar and molasses, and make my own brown sugar. And then you mix the cocoa and the brown sugar, you put a little water in, you cook it, and you get the world's best mocha syrup. It's very rich. It's delicious.
I want to just chime in here, Janet. I want to chime in here and just say, I love the fact that you think Anthony and I are young people. That makes me so happy. I mean, Anthony is definitely a young person.
Well, no, I'm turning 60, so I don't think anybody thinks I'm young anymore.
No, I don't think anyone thinks I'm young either.
Thank you, Janet. Any other callers on the line? Asking my producer, Mike. If there are no other callers, the don't be shy or bashful. It's 92 the Mooch, 928-436-6624. But before we wrap, Hitha, what are you doing for Christmas? Tell me your plans. Christmas, Hanukkah, New Year's. What's your holiday game plan?
Well, we always do the same thing, which is we usually go to New Mexico, where I'm from. My mom lives there, but we're going to stay here in the city. Our friends have a Christmas Eve party. Cool. And then we go to Philadelphia after Christmas. I know it sounds silly. I don't have family in Philadelphia. Seth does not have family in Philadelphia. He's from Princeton. But we go and have a 3-day vacation at this beautiful hotel that exists there. And, we save all of our money, and then we go and take the girls there because there's a pool 59 stories up in the sky that the kids like to swim in. Yeah.
I love the idea. I love the creativity. I think we have one more caller, and then obviously we'll wrap the show for this week. Anybody else calling in?
You didn't tell me what you were doing, but maybe we could talk about it after the
whole
call.
I go skiing, and so I'm going to be up in Wyndham. I have a small place up there and take the kids. We've got Andrew on from Massachusetts. Andrew.
Hey, Anthony. First of all, I love your show and your perspective on the world. I think it's great. It's forthright, and that's great to see in today's media world. The question I have is, how do you reconcile the apparent dichotomy or difference between consumer sentiment? And I have to say, polls are not necessarily reliable, but where consumers are kind of negative on the world. Or politically negative. Actually, this gets into politics, actually, and I don't know if we want to go there, but how do you explain the difference between people's view of, how terrible everything is with the fact that our GDP is at a record rate, inflation is down from 9% to 3%, employment is, real wages are increasing, et cetera, et cetera. How do you explain that difference?
Heath, you want to take a shot first, or you want me to go?
Of course.
You go first. Yep.
Consumer sentiment, you're absolutely right. It doesn't, sometimes the numbers don't make sense. You know, you have this high consumer sentiment, or consumer sentiment is, you know, increasing, yet the economy, the numbers are kind of showing that, you know, nothing is really, you know, feeling good or looking good, or the outlook doesn't look good. And I think it just, again, I think this is the theme that's been running through this entire episode, but it's that false sense of everything is okay because of access to credit. And it kind of comes back to that always. When consumers feel like wages are increasing, unemployment is coming down, but then they have this access to credit, that makes them feel a little bit better despite what the macro numbers are saying.
Yeah, I guess that's my point. Is apparently the polls, at least the political polls, have many people, you know, not too happy about the president's performance. When the statistics, if you just look at cold statistics in terms of employment or economic growth, they're pretty astonishing. I mean, and we came out of this disastrous period in early 2020 pretty well, actually. So I'm just trying to understand, you know, what
gas prices are also down.
Like,
you know?
I just watch things, all right. And what I see is, I see a lot of people. I see restaurants filled. I see parking lots filled, and that's despite the fact that I don't even do any shopping in stores anymore. It's just on Amazon. But you know, it looks to me like things are pretty vibrant.
Yeah, and gas prices are down at $2.97 out here on Long Island. So I hear you on that as well, Andrew. I guess what I'll just say quickly, because unfortunately we have to wrap the show, is that there's time before the election. And I think as the litigation of that election takes place, whoever the eventual nominees are, it looks like it could be the two presidents, President Biden and President Trump. I think there'll be a litigation of this economic data, and you know, it'll probably be favorable for the Democrats if this data keeps up and we don't slip into a recession in 2024. And by the way, the odds of us slipping into a recession during a presidential year are low. And you guys may know this, but it's worth repeating. The stock market goes up 83% of the time during a presidential year. So it's just something to think about. I'm sorry that we have to go, but I really appreciate you calling in, Andrew. My friend Hitha, I hope to see you soon. I'm not going to see you in Philadelphia in that 50-story swimming pool, but please tell Seth I say hi. Congratulations on everything. And guys, thank you again for joining us on Speak Up with Anthony Scaramucci. And we'll be back to you guys next week. Same time, same bat channel.